Welcome to the Daily Views on September 9th in 2021. And let's start in Jakarta in Indonesia. In a fire in a prison near the Indonesian capital Jakarta, at least 41 prisoners were killed and 8 others were seriously injured. The fire broke out early Wednesday morning in the Tangerang Correctional Facility, about 20 kilometers from the metropolis, said police spokesman Yusri Yunus. 41 people were found dead, he said. 30 others were slightly injured. The flames have been brought under control. The cause of the fire has not yet been determined. Rika Aprianti, a spokeswoman for the Director General of Prisons at the Justice Department, said the fire destroyed a block of the prison that housed 122 inmates, mostly drug addicts. And she said, "This is a disaster and our condolences go out to the families of the victims." The prison wing was overcrowded and actually only designed for 40 prisoners. Like many other prisons in the Southeast Asian island nation, the prison in Tangerang is chronically overcrowded. According to the Ministry of Justice, more than 2,000 convicts recently served their sentences there, although the building was built for a maximum of 600 prisoners. Our judicial system relies on detention as a form of punishment, said a statement from the Institute for Criminal Law Reform. A big problem is the failed war on drugs in the fourth most populous country on earth. The majority of the 28,241 drug convicts in Indonesian prisons are drug users who should not be in custody at all, said the institute. And now, not too far away, let's go to Hong Kong in China. In the campaign by the law enforcement authorities against the democratic opposition in Hong Kong, 4 well-known activists were arrested again on Wednesday. The arrests were made in connection with the controversial new security law. As announced by the Hong Kong Alliance in support of patriotic democratic movements in China, its vice chairwoman, lawyer Cho Hang-tun, and senior members Leung Kam-kwai, Tang Gok-wan, and Chan Dor-wai were picked up by the state security police that morning. The group previously organized the annual mass events in Hong Kong to commemorate the victims of the bloody crackdown on democracy movement in China on June 4th in 1989 on the Tiananmen Place. On Tuesday, the day before the arrest, the 4 leading members of the alliance refused to cooperate with the authorities in investigations based on the security law and to disclose confidential data. And now, let's go to Berlin in Germany. Development Minister Gerd Müller has called for more efforts to protect the rainforest on the African continent. He said the destruction of the rainforest through slash and burn, for example in the Amazon, Indonesia, or the Congo Basin, accounts for 11% of global CO2 emissions. Experts estimate that there will be no rainforest left in the Congo Basin by 2100, said Müller on Wednesday at a conference on protection of the African rainforest in Berlin. Müller warned of dramatic consequences for all of humanity. Because the Congo Basin is the second largest tropical forest after the Amazon rainforest and the largest CO2 sink on Earth, the African rainforests bind more CO2 than any other forest, said the Christian socialist politician. The aim of the Tropical Forest Conference is better protection of rainforests worldwide. For the forest in the Congo Basin, Müller, together with representatives of the 10 neighboring countries, has agreed to strengthen protective measures. According to the Ministry of Development, the declaration was drawn up together with scientists and civil society in the neighboring countries. The aim is to protect and restore 127 million hectares of forest by 2030. That corresponds to 3 times the area of Germany, by the way. According to this information, the protective measures include transparent supply chains for wood from the region, economic alternatives for the people, and a close involvement of the indigenous population as the guardian of the forests. And now let's go to Wellington in New Zealand. New Zealand has largely lifted the nationwide corona lockdown after 3 weeks. The number of new infections had fallen significantly in the past few days compared to August. On Wednesday, health authorities reported about 20 new infections within 24 hours for the fourth time in a row. A few weeks ago, the number was briefly over 80. Only in the megacity of Auckland, the epicenter of the current outbreak, the restrictions should initially continue to apply. Shops and schools were allowed to reopen in all other parts of the country. However, some rules should remain in place everywhere. Citizens now have to wear masks indoors. In addition, only a maximum of 50 people are allowed to gather indoors and up to 100 people outdoors. The island nation in the South Pacific, like its neighbor Australia, has long pursued a zero COVID strategy. People lived largely isolated from the rest of the world, but continued to live largely normally despite the pandemic for months, even without masks. The highly contagious Delta variant had changed the game, said Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern recently. According to a survey published in the newspaper New Zealand Herald at the end of August, most citizens still want the zero COVID approach. New Zealand is seen worldwide as a model country in the fight against the virus. So far, only around 3,800 infections have been confirmed. 27 people have died in connection with COVID-19. However, so far only about 25% of the 5 million inhabitants are fully vaccinated. And now let's go to London in the UK. Great Britain has called on the leading economic nations to join forces in the fight against online crime and child abuse. It is crucial that the G7 and technology companies take action to protect children from sick perpetrators and to take action against their heinous crimes, said British Secretary Priti Patel in London at the start of the meeting with her counterparts from the G7 countries. In addition to Great Britain and Germany, these include France, Italy, Canada, Japan, and the USA. With a special funding program, the British government wants to support organizations that use their technologies to make the internet safer for children. According to the British, the ministers and state secretaries also wanted to talk about current developments in Afghanistan, the international fight against terrorism, and illegal migration at their personal meeting in London on Wednesday and Thursday. And Priti Patel, of course, migration had to be a point there. But now let's go to New Delhi in India. India wants to expand its own palm oil cultivation in order to reduce its dependence on the large producers Indonesia and Malaysia. According to a statement, the government has provided the equivalent of almost 1.3 billion euros. That's 110 billion rupees. According to the environmental protection organization WWF, India is the world's largest importer of palm oil. Environmentalists and opposition politicians warned of possible damage from the clearing of rainforests, water scarcity, and negative effects on the climate. The money is to be used to increase the annual palm oil production in India from currently around 300,000 tons to 2.8 million tons by 2030. For comparison, according to the financial service providers S&P Global, India imported 7.2 million tons of the controversial vegetable oil in 2020. According to the government, the cultivation area is to go from 370,000 to 1 million hectares, and farmers are to be supported. The newspaper The Indian Express reported, among other things, that the government gave the green light to the palm oil plants despite objections from the Indian Council of Forestry Research and Education. The head of the Center for Sustainable Agriculture, G.V. Ramanyanulu, warned that expanding palm oil production could affect monsoons and temperatures. Agriculture Minister Narendra Tomar, on the other hand, stressed that there would be no deforestation. India's southern neighbor Sri Lanka banned the import and cultivation of palm oil in the spring, among other things, for environmental reasons. And now, let's go to Montevideo in Uruguay. In view of the hardened fronts in the South American Economic Alliance Mercosur, Uruguay wants to conclude a free trade agreement with China on its own. A formal request has been received from Beijing to examine such a contract, the government in Montevideo announced on Tuesday. The world is moving quickly and is not waiting for us, said President Luis Lacalle Pou. Today, Uruguay turned words into deeds. We open ourselves to the world in order to create wealth. This is likely to further escalate the dispute in Mercosur. Actually, the member states of Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay and Paraguay are only allowed to negotiate free trade agreements with third countries. However, the situation in the South American Economic Alliance is currently quite deadlocked. The left-wing government of Argentina wants to protect the domestic economy from international competition, while the right-wing governments in Brazil and Uruguay want to dismantle trade barriers. The free trade agreement between Mercosur and the European Union is also currently on hold. After years of negotiations, the negotiators agreed on an agreement in 2019. The treaty would create the largest free trade area in the world with around 780 million people. However, ratification has stalled. One of the criticisms in Europe is that the treaty does not provide for any sanction mechanisms, for example, against the massive deforestation of the rainforest in the Amazon region. And now we have to go back to Conakry in Guinea. After the coup in West African Guinea, the civil government controlled by the military junta announced the release of further political prisoners on Tuesday evening. The day before, the leader of the coup, Mamadi Doumbouya, had released the first politicians. With a view to other opposition members who had been arrested under the ousted President Alpha Condé, he had promised further dismissals. The measure was announced by one of the secretaries generals who provisionally managed the official business until new ministers are appointed. The United Nations, the United States, the European Union and Russia have condemned the coup. Guinea is one of the world's largest suppliers of bauxite and ore used to make aluminum. The country, with around 13 million inhabitants, which is roughly the size of Great Britain and borders the Atlantic Ocean in the west of the continent, supplies all major world markets, with China as one of its largest consumers. And now let's go to Sofia in Bulgaria. In Bulgaria, no new government could be formed even after the 11th election. On Tuesday, the Socialists, the BSP, the third strongest party, returned their government mandate to head of state Rumen Radev due to a lack of majority. The EU country is heading for another early parliamentary election. Unfortunately, new elections and negotiations are waiting for us, said Radev. After the failed third attempt to form the government, he has to dissolve parliament, set a new election date, and appoint another transitional government. There are no precise deadlines, though. This would be the third parliamentary election in 2021 already. The exact date for this in November was still unclear. We received no support, said Socialist leader Cornelia Ninova, about the three protest parties. They had cancelled government talks with the Socialists, who had emerged from the former Communist State Party. The Socialists had only 36 of the 240 seats in parliament. The populist ITN of the entertainer Slavi Trifonov, with 65 seats, had won the election in July, just ahead of the bourgeois GERB with 63 seats of ex-Prime Minister Boyko Borisov, but like the GERB, it decided not to form a government. The parliament elected on April 4th was also unable to produce a majority capable of governing. And now, let's go to Brussels in Belgium. Turkey and other 6 countries with official prospects of joining the EU are to receive around 14.2 billion euros in so-called pre-accession aid by the end of 2027. The Council of EU member states approved the funding on Tuesday. It was negotiated in June by the then Portuguese presidency with representatives of the EU Parliament, although I don't understand the Turkey part. According to the Council, the EU funds are to be used for reforms that should pave the way for future EU memberships. In addition to Turkey, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Serbia are also planned as recipient countries. The Council said the funds would be distributed depending on the reform efforts of the countries. Accession negotiations with Turkey have been on hold for several years because of well-known setbacks. The official approval of the European Parliament for the financing is expected in September. According to the agreement from June, however, it is considered a formality. And now, once again, we have to go to London, to the UK. A 23-year-old German has been sentenced to more than 3 years in prison in London for spreading terrorist propaganda. A court in London on Tuesday imposed a special 40-month sentence, of which the convict was sentenced to at least 2/3 in prison. The men had exchanged videos of brutal mass executions, bomb attacks, and flags of the terrorist organization Islamic State, the IS, with a friend on messenger services before officials arrested him at London's Stansted Airport last October and discovered the contents on his cell phone. Previously, the men had spent about half a year with friends in London. A few months ago, the 23-year-old, who originally comes from Ratingen in North Rhine-Westphalia, had already confessed to the incidents. However, his defense attorney described him as an immature young man who had not intended to disseminate the propaganda material on a large scale and has since distanced himself from it. Illegal is illegal. I hope you liked today's news, not the content, but I mean the way it's presented, because I'm trying to do it daily seriously, because I think to get a broader picture that my global channel here is the best point to do that. And just one video a day on one of those, I don't think that is enough to get a wider picture on what's happening on our planet. And so I hope you agree with me that I should continue like this. I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.